All right, company. Hey y'all, and welcome back to Heaven's Space. For those who are uninitiated, this is Dungeons and Doofuses. A series that I, Jones, your host, talks about the little things that make characters and stories just a little more interesting. Now, if you're anything like me, or if you watched the last video, nothing quite shakes things up like seeing a bunch of people try to rip each other to shreds. Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, any other TTRPG where you have to roll dice, they all got a combat system for a reason. Hell, let's say you're just role playing online over text. Chances are you've gotten into a boxing match over some stupid stuff. Who hasn't? The thing about that, though, for as relatively common as they may be, fight scenes tend to be some of the hardest things to describe for those without much experience. It's kind of like how it takes forever for somebody who knows how to draw to learn how to actually draw a hand, even though they might have the rest of their anatomy and style figured out. Yeah, I'm projecting. What are you gonna do about it, huh? So, now let's talk violence. Okay, so before we get into detail, first off, I want to talk about one of the more underappreciated aspects of fighting that I like character interaction. Let me explain. So, you know fighting games, right? Street Fighting, Fatal Fury, King of Fighters, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Guilty Gear, Skullgirls, Dragon Ball Fighter Z. The list goes on. Now, you may be wondering, well, aren't writing, role-playing, and TTRPGs like really different from video games, especially fighting games? Well, you'd be correct, but they all have a unique sense of interactivity. Yeah, the ways in which you may go about it might be different, and the same goes to what extent you might be able to do so. But in the end, you still get to control what your character does and how they do it. To me, a good fight is like its own self contained narrative, and fighting games just so happen to be a really good example of that. Fighting games, while they may have story modes and coherent plots, are inherently unique in the sense that as long as the characters exist in the same game, they can fight. Because of this, while individual versus matches may not be canon, and the characters fighting may not actually meet ever within the story, it does give them a chance to interact and bounce off of each other. And, by extension, it also allows the player to fill in the blanks themselves. Especially when the character that's way weaker in canon absolutely destroys one of the most powerful characters in the series. The difference is, however, instead of communication being done through dialogue, it's done also through the wonderful power of violence. They say you can tell a lot about a person through their actions, and what are fights? Fights are people using their actions to get a point across, violently. Fights are an excellent way to express a character's traits and how they would act under pressure, and also provide insight on how they would handle a situation. So, if you want to write a great fight scene, the first thing you have to do is have a solid grasp on what makes your character your character. For example, let's say you have a personality laid out, but you can't settle on a fighting style. If they calm and collected, maybe they try to predict their opponent's next move and shoot for counters. Or you can do the exact opposite and add some contrast, and have them throw caution to the wind and rush through their fighting before they can even think. Second, if you also want to add some extra secret sauce to your fight scenes, try landing a martial art. Yeah, let me cook you, okay? I speak from personal experience when I tell you, when you know what moves to use, when to use them, and most importantly, how to use them, helps a lot when it comes to writing your own fight scene. Of course, that's not always an option. So, if you don't have the time, money, or interest in picking up a new hobby just to describe people hitting each other really good, all you really need to do is set aside some time to get some research done. What is that research? Well, that's situational. The most I can really tell you without dragging this entire video out is that if you want to write a swordsman, try studying stuff like fencing or kendo to see what will fit the most. If you're trying to write, let's say, a boxer, watch a few matches, study how they move, how they react to certain actions, and what strategies they try to use to win. But generally speaking, you have to learn how to use the rules if you want to break them at some point. But let's say you don't have time for that either. In that case, something that I've noticed is that it doesn't matter if you don't know what you're doing, as long as it sounds like you know what you're doing. Because of that, knowing just the basics of how everything works can get you pretty far even if you have no idea what you're doing. Where did I learn this? You guessed it, fighting games. In a fighting game, every move has three distinct points, sometimes four, but that's pushing it. We have wind up, getting ready to throw the attack. Release, actually throwing the attack. Impact, the attack hitting something. And then, sometimes end lag or recovery. Recovery is the amount of time it takes someone to recover from throwing their own attack to return to a more advantageous position. Recovery is bringing your hand back after you throw a punch, resetting your stance after throwing a kick, closing dramatically after putting your katana back into its scabbard when you do a cool anime sword flash on someone. All of that, that's recovery. In writing, we don't see recovery a lot of the time because if we don't know how to write it, it's boring as hell. Recovery, though, when used correctly, is a lot like salt, MSG, or cocaine. A little goes a long way. Do you need to go into extreme detail every time someone pulls their arm back after throwing a punch? No, that's boring. But if someone punches somebody in the face and uses the recoil to snap their hand back, weave to the side, and then use momentum to follow up with a hook, that adds depth to the exchange. Fights at the most basic of levels are a simple matter of cause and effect. Guy A attacks, so Guy B is either going to get hit or their attack doesn't go as planned because Guy B did something to defend. And after they get hit or defend themselves, what do? Does their head get snapped back from the force of the punch? Did they see the punch coming and move with it at the last second to take the edge off? Did they raise their guard at the last second so the punch didn't hit them in the face but the elbow instead, breaking the other guy's hand? Also, why does Guy A punch Guy B? Were they trying to get a read on the distance between them and Guy B? Were they trying to see how Guy B would react? Were they trying to end the fight quickly by punching them as hard as possible in the opening seconds? Did Guy B say something about Guy A's mom, and now he just wants to punch him and doesn't really care about strategy? By narrowing each action to cause and effect, it helps give them meaning, and by doing that, the fight scene has more depth, which makes things more interesting. Well, kinda, it's actually way more complicated than that, but hey, you only need to know the basics. So that's enough of the technical aspect. Let's get to why you actually clicked on. You want to write a fight scene and you want to make it sound cool. Problem is, you don't know how. Now, you can be as concise as you want, or you can go as in detail as you want. One gets a point across faster, the other can help sell the audience on how important a fight may be. But above all else, impact is everything. Impact, in the sense of physical impact, how the attacks actually hit something, and then impact in the sense of drawing some kind of emotion from the audience. Physical impact, that's easy. Just have the attack do something, whether it works out or not. Picture this, there's a big buff guy. He's holding a huge sword, and he's fighting a goblin in the field or something, right? He swings hard, and the goblin dodges out the way at the last second. But what happens next? Would that big buff guy overcommit and give the goblin a chance to slip in under the sword and shape him through the gaps of his armor with the dagger? The sword gets stuck in a nearby tree, digging deep into its bark. Seeing an opening, the goblin runs in. The knife slips in through the links of their chainmail undershirt, snapping them to use as pieces of metal as they plunged their knife as deep as they could into the big buff guy's abdomen. Did the goblin scramble away to get distance and now they're about to shit their pants? Why wouldn't they? They just turned their head and saw that that sword just split a tree in half and sliced through a giant patch of grass in one go like it was nothing. Grass, splinters, and leaves are flying everywhere. The goblins standing there with the realization that if they didn't move, all of that stuff would have been their neck, and head, and vertebra. Did that big buff guy overcommit on purpose to draw that goblin's attention to his sword before using that momentum to go flying at the goblin and punch him right in the goblin nose? As the goblin shot into counter, the big buff guy moved like a swing, pulling himself into a spin as he sent the back of his fist flying across the goblin's face. pushing their nose in and sending them flying back into a tree with a resounding thud. Do you have to do all of that exactly? No. Like I said earlier, keep in mind what variables will cause what, and then use those to lean into what's happening and sell the impact. Professional wrestling is an amazing example of this. Because there's so many people in one place, wrestlers have to exaggerate their movements in order to make sure everyone watching knows what's going on. Not only that, professional wrestling, at its core, is entirely fight choreography. The outcomes might be predetermined, but there's a reason why WWE is still around and a decent chunk of wrestlers go into acting. If you're a wrestler, you have to be good at bringing out emotion. Wrestlers often stomp with their punches and shake the ring. They tumble back and bounce off the canvas after getting thrown. And despite getting slammed into the ground, they crumple in on themselves and hit backflips before going completely limp. And then you have K-pop, the personas that wrestlers put on while in the ring. We have faces, the so-called protagonists that the organizers want you to root for. And then we have heels, obstacles for the faces to overcome. And we have heel turns, events where a face suddenly turns and shifts their persona to become a heel. Now, if you're paying attention, tell me, does this sound familiar to you? That's right, like a good fight scene, wrestling matches are self contained narratives. The same goes in martial arts movies. K-fob, K-fab, K-fab, whatever you want to call it. K-fob is when a wrestler puts on a persona during a match, or a character, so to speak. We have heels, the so-called antagonists of professional wrestling, and we have faces, the protagonists. As you would expect, usually you want to root for the face and want the heel to lose. But sometimes we have heel turns, where a beloved wrestler suddenly becomes a heel. That is to say, like a good fight scene, wrestling matches are somewhat like their own self-contained narratives. Does that sound familiar? That's right, it all comes back to fighting games. On a similar note, we also have martial arts movies. When you see someone get kicked in the chest so hard they go flying out the window, or when they get punched so hard you hear the whoosh of their fist, and each individual rib breaking with each punch. You know what you think? You think, damn, I want to be that guy. But are those impacts, those reactions, are they entirely realistic? Not necessarily, but they do make sense within the context of their settings, and the emotions they invoke make sense. Because, like I say, emotional impact is just as important as physical impact. If you have solid choreography, chances are your fight is already going to get some people thinking. There's something inherently cool about seeing two people beat each other into a fine pace. So, before writing a fight scene, ask yourself this. Do you want to write a scene about characters fighting, or do you want to write a scene about a fight? If you want the fight itself to be the main focus of the scene, refer to everything I said earlier. However, if what you want is a fight scene that's more than just a senseless ass whooping, let's say you want to dive into certain aspects of your character and shove all of that into your audience faces. The good news is, cause and effect still somewhat applies to the emotional aspect of fight scenes. As fun as senseless violence may sometimes be, fights most of the time don't happen in a vacuum. They usually have some kind of inciting event that leads up to them. Ideological clashes, simple disagreements, times of great stress, and even sanctioned sporting events are all common examples of this. But beyond that, what drives your opponent to keep fighting rather than just talking things out? Like all narratives, self-contained or not, a good fight has either some form of stakes or displays some kind of dynamic between characters. These stakes, they don't have to necessarily change the entire course of a story, but they do have to be enough to be interesting. Look at sparring. Sure, training matches aren't death battles, but they provide an opportunity for your characters to learn and grow. With emotional impact, it's not as easy to describe without breaking flow as it is with sheer action. Luckily, there's a surprisingly simple solution to this. Just mix the emotions with the action. Let's say, for example, your character's angry. What happens? They swing for defenses, throwing away all logic and technique to knock their opponent's head off their shoulders, but that makes them more sloppy and inefficient. Or are they the cold fury type, where they start striking at every opening they can, making sure that whoever pissed them off doesn't have a second to breathe? Methodically, of course. Do they stop caring about the fight altogether and pull out a gun? What if they don't want the fight to begin with, but they're forced to fight for one reason or another? Maybe they try to talk things out, but they got punched in the throat mid-monologue. Maybe they're trying to fight, right, but their moves are shaky and hesitant, which keeps them from landing any meaningful hits. Maybe they want to end things as quickly and as painlessly as possible, so they either go for a fast knockout or try to restrain them so they can calm down. How you go about this also depends on how you want to write the action, but that's the same shit as before. So, in terms of pure emotion, you can get away with going into detail about how they feel while fighting. But if you want the fighting to be the main focus and still want to go into the emotional aspect, you can get away with having actions speak for themselves, for the most part. TLDR. When you're writing a fight scene, you have to kind of treat it like an actual fight. So, before you write something, ask yourself this. Does what you're writing have some kind of thought or explanation behind it, no matter how it may turn out for the characters themselves? If so, you'll probably be fine, hopefully. Anyway, that's all the time we've got. If you enjoyed this video and want to see me rant more, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Peace.